This is not about hurt feelings or offence. We don't care. We don't care about pro-Palestinian organising and events that take place throughout the city. We've seen this for years and years and years. We leave them to their activism. This is something quite different. When we talk about an intifada, it has a very precise historical meaning, and that means the deliberate targeting of Jewish civilians in suicide bombings principally, but other forms of attack as well, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of Israeli civilians. And when you talk about globalizing intifada, it means taking what was perfected in Israel by Hamas and other terrorist organizations in the early 2000s, resulting in hundreds of people being blown apart in pizza shops and cafes and restaurants, including an Australian girl, Malki Roth, who was killed in Jerusalem in a pizza shop, taking that and bringing it to the world. That's what Hamas has called for many years, and its willing apologists in the West are now acting upon that and seeking to export it here. But we're not even dealing in the realm of hypotheticals. The Intifada came to Australia on the 14th of December. That massacre is exactly what the Intifada entails, finding Jewish people at their most vulnerable where they're assembled and slaughtering them in cold blood. So the fact that in our city, in the same city that just witnessed this atrocity, that the Lord Mayor of Sydney is allowing this to take place, it's positively astounding.
Alex, what do you make of Premier Chris Minns, who was asked if he would pick up the phone and call Clover Moore, and he said no because she's not going to listen to him? Does it disappoint you, though, when it does come to the time where you stand up and need to have as many voices as possible to stop these sort of events going ahead, and they remain silent?
I agree. We know where the Premier stands on this. We know that he stands with the Jewish community. We know he opposes this chant and opposes this event. But everybody in a position of influence and power needs to exercise that power for good. And they need to ensure that whatever pressure they can bring to bear to ensure that this incitement does not continue in our streets, so that we don't see more deadly attacks in our streets, they have to do whatever they can do. And maybe Clover Moore won't listen, but at least the Premier will know that he's done whatever he can to prevent this from happening, preventing this extra piece of incitement, this extra piece of glorification of racist violence in our city. I think the Prime Minister should do likewise. I mean, he might say that this is a local matter and he's the Prime Minister of the country, but again, when we're talking about a matter of national security, a matter of national importance, I think anyone who can bring any influence to bear on Clover Moore and her councillors should do so.
Alex, I really thought after the Bondi massacre, we would have done everything that we can to not have a repeat of that horrific event. But I just really fear that anti-Semitism is now becoming embedded in our society, where it's almost normalised. And instead of us wrapping our arms around our Jewish community, it's events like this. And we have to stop and just ask the question of, as a nation, how can we possibly accept this going ahead and allowing anti-Semitism to continue to fester in a way that it has? I mean, it's been around for a long time, but since October 7 in particular.
I think you're absolutely right. And we saw from a long process, beginning with October 7, how anti-Semitism was allowed to become normal in our society, how people were able to chant violent threats directed at their Jewish neighbours with impunity, with no consequences, how people were able to abuse Jewish people on the streets with no consequences, and the progression, inevitable progression from that to vandalism, to fire bombings, and what we all knew was inevitably going to happen, which is death. But it shows that once anti-Semitism takes root in a society, it's not easy to unpack and wind back. Even something like Bondi, which should have startled the entire nation and shown exactly where we had fallen to and what was been allowed to happen and fester in our society, it should have shaken us from that stupor, but it didn't do that. The good and decent in this country obviously abhor anti-Semitism, are appalled by what happened at Bondi, and would never think of supporting it. But there is a segment of our society which we cannot underestimate, which is so fixated in the hatred of the Jewish community that even Bondi doesn't change their course and change their ideology. You see the denials of Bondi, the conspiracy theories about it being an inside job or being a fabrication. People who are fixated with the Jews, and we've seen this throughout history, it's like a mental disease that lodges in the mind, and it dislodges any capacity for rational thought and humanity. And that's what we're seeing. But this is why we need the good and decent to stand up and to isolate those extremists to show that they will never become the mainstream movement in this country. We have an obligation to ensure that what happened at Bondi never happens again, and it begins with moments like this.
You're absolutely right, Alex. We need Premier Chris Minns to stand up and stop that event going ahead. I really appreciate your time this evening.